welcome. We are here with Neill. Say hi, Neill.
Hi, Neill.
Well done. If you have been about with us on Zoom for the past wee while, you will have heard the budgies in the background as the Shaw family have led us in worship. So this feels a bit like behind the scenes. What are the budgies called?
Buddy and Sunshine. Sunshine is
Buddy.
the yellow and green one, Buddy is the blue one.
That's good. So true St Mirren fan.
True St Mirren fan.
Even calling your budgie buddy, that's quite something. We are going to continue our summer series talking about 3 verses. So a verse that the previous generation have given us, one for the current season and one that we would pass on to the next generation. So we haven't had a chat about what our verses are. We're just going to each read our first one and then have a bit of a chat about it and see where the conversation goes. Do you want to read your first one?
Yeah, my first verse is 2 verses. Hope that's alright. It's Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 to 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider each other better than yourself. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others.
So mine is Exodus chapter 3 verse 5, which is when Moses is at the burning bush. And the bush, or God, says, "Do not come any closer." God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." So why that verse?
I picked this verse as the verse that has been passed on to me from previous generation. And although it has been passed on as a verse in terms of, my parents talking to me about it, my mum and dad reading over it and discussing it with me, I think more than anything it's been passed on in the example of my mum. And when my dad was here, my dad as well, who constantly sacrificed their own desires to serve others, who I think really embodied the point that verse is getting across and the point that Paul is trying to make. I think it's really relevant today in a world that promotes the me, in a world that says there's points and there's privilege to be earned in being a victim and being special and claiming your own sort of right and your own ground and your own privilege. That this verse is very counter to that culture, and it says, no, I want you to consider other people as valuable, as important as you are. I want you to do nothing out of vain conceit, nothing out of selfish ambition, but instead look to the needs of others and look to meeting the needs of others. And I think that counterculture nature of that verse and of the gospel, I think encapsulates a really good example of what I see in my mum and what I saw in my parents, and how I think that as Christians we should be living in the world today.
I think for our generation, you definitely see some of that culture in the world around us of churches about us, and it's what I can get out of it and how much I enjoy it, or whether the music's the type of music I like, all of these kind of things. And I think even in our own congregation, like, I know you know Hugh and Anne from when you were a kid, but you look at a couple like that and just see the selflessness that is just part of who they are, and they're very humble, but they just tell stories of the past, and you can see in them a real generosity of spirit and lives that aren't really lived for themselves. And same with Alistair and Patricia. I think they embody it as well. These lives that have just been given to others. And I'm sure Hugh and Anne and Alistair and Patricia probably hear those words and feel they've been selfish at times. But I think there's a heart thing going on there as well, and we get it wrong as much as we get it right. But I think their hearts are have embodiments of what that verse is talking about. I think it is very challenging when it's easy to be selfish and think about ourselves.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a generational thing, whether the previous generation had that more built in or baked into them in terms of their upbringing, or whether it's something that's acquired through living life and through through gaining experience, whether you become more aware of the needs of others and you become more aware of those around about you. It's maybe a bit of both. I do think that there is definitely something in this culture that is very individualistic and not as communitarian and not as concerned about the other.
Yeah.
And I think even sometimes in some of the activism that we see people engage in, it actually is much about how good I can look, about the activism that I demonstrate, and not necessarily about what I'm doing for the needs of the other. And I think this verse just really cuts through all that nonsense and says you need to don't do anything out of vain conceit, but actually think about the other person.
I guess it's part of the model we, as a leadership team in the church, try and lead the church through, is how do we, even as a church community, not focus on ourselves, but give ourselves freely and have a generous spirit. And there's loads that's not perfect about the Rock. I'm not going to pretend we're a perfect church by any means, but there's little things we do that I really love. So, like last Sunday of the month, we always give the collection plate away to something else. We've chosen some international charities that folk in the church have relationship with and are passionate about, but just that generosity of spirit. I think for me, the Phoenix is an embodiment of that I know a few folk, when we took on the building, went, oh, it must be nice for the church to have their own building now. And I've had no interest. I think since we started, there's been very little interest among the leadership team to have a building, like having a building to pay. Being able to walk in and someone else has cleaned and someone else has put the chairs out for you, and you just go in and the heating's already on. And you don't have any headaches. You just pay the whole hire fee. When we were in Westborough Gentle and the Borough Hall and Dunbarton Academy, in a lot of ways that suited us more. Working on the Phoenix was never about the church having a building, but us going, we're paying rent on a Sunday when we could be using that money to run a building and do some good things for the community during the week. And I guess trying to embody that as individuals, but also as a whole church community that is the body of Christ, as a symbol of who Jesus is, as we live that out as a church community, to have that generosity of spirit and that selflessness is counterintuitive at times and isn't the way our nature goes, but I think really important.
A few years ago, we celebrated the Rock birthday. What was it, 25 years?
25 years. Yeah.
So here's a thought: maybe there's something about the Rock coming into maturity as a body, as the body of that one expression of the church.
Yeah.
That this is almost a natural part of that maturation process. A bit like we were talking about before, as someone gets older, maybe they begin to think a bit more about what's out with them. Maybe that's just a completely out there concept that's neither here nor there, but I wonder whether there's something in just that process of
Possibly.
maturation that
I'm now imagining myself at 25 years old and thinking how mature I was. I'm not, yeah, it's a long time ago. Yeah. No, but yeah, I think church communities do go on a journey, and yeah, we've made some deliberate choices in terms of never having a building before and meeting in places that didn't have barriers, that people would find easier to come into, kind of neutral spaces. And it's why we still, even though we've got our own building, we don't have a sanctuary like some churches would that's separate. But and this maybe ties into the idea of holy ground, but so we use the same hall on a Sunday that is an exercise class and a toddler group venue and a youth club and dance classes, and it's the same space, that somehow we want to root ourselves in a place and not say that's holy ground and this isn't, but all of it's holy ground. I'm trying to segue into my verse here.
It's okay.
I didn't do that on purpose at the start, but that's where I am now. So my granddad is, on my mum's side, is a vicar, or a retired vicar, Anglican vicar. And I remember him saying once to me that the most common description of God in Scripture is holy. I don't know, I presume it's true because my grandpa told me. Grandpas don't lie, everyone knows that. But we talk about God as love as probably the primary image. We talk about God and He is love, like the Bible says those words explicitly. God is love. But His holiness is bigger than that, is more prominent than that. So I think there's something in this moment where Moses approaches God and is talking in the burning bush, and he is just reminding Moses that you are stepping into the story of something bigger than yourself. That maybe this ties back into the individualistic thing, that we follow God who loves us, that there is a deep relational nature to God, but He is also bigger than that. I don't think that separates from the love. I think it makes the love all the more remarkable. I think when we get the vastness of God, then the intimacy of God becomes even fuller. But I think also with this idea of holy ground, that Moses can go so far but then has to take his sandals off because he's stepping into this special place. And then we get that image of the crucifixion and the Holy of Holies, the place where only the priest can go because the ground's so holy. And that curtain rips, and it's almost that the whole cosmos becomes the Holy of Holies in that moment. And that image has probably had a really profound effect on me that I don't, or I try not to. I probably do it all the time, but I try not to think about, well, that's my spiritual life and this is my day-to-day life, that all of it becomes intertwined, that you don't step off holy ground. That when I'm in the rugby changing room, I haven't played for years, but they feel like, why are you here? You're not in the squad. But when I was in the rugby changing room, I was no less on holy ground than when I'm in the middle of singing a worship song at church. That call to live our lives, not two ways of thinking, but just every aspect of every situation we find ourselves in, when we're doing church stuff, when we're not doing church stuff, when I'm with my family, and I fail at it all the time. I get things wrong all the time, but it is that reminder that I'm constantly on holy ground. And whether that's a reminder that when I think I can be selfish because it's not a church thing, so it's okay, I go, actually I can't be, because in everything I do, I have to have the same mind as Christ. I have to, if I'm saying His Lord of my life, then that means everything comes under His Lordship. That's my thoughts on that.
I think there's also a call in it, and be careful to get across what I mean here, but I think there's a call in it away from frivolity and flippancy, is that the word? And a call to the realization that actually this this journey that we're being called on with God. So Moses at that point is being called into, it's the very beginning of the call into a journey with God. And this journey that we're being called into is one that needs to be treated with huge amounts of holiness, with huge amounts of seriousness. It doesn't mean that it's not fun. It doesn't mean that we can't have fun. It doesn't mean that it doesn't involve lots of laughter. But it's also a serious business. It's the business for which Christ came to earth and went to the cross. And therefore, there's that, I think, tied up in that thing of you need to take your shoes off, because you need to realise that what I'm calling you to now, where you are from this moment forward, is somewhere that's holy, it's somewhere that's serious, it's somewhere that's set apart for you and I to walk this journey together. And I think there's something sobering about that yes, our walk with God is exciting, yes, our walk with God is fun-filled, and it's a wonderful experience. And as you go into the Rock website, it says the adventure starts here, and there's something adventurous about it, but at the same time as that, there's also something quite solemn and quite serious, and something that requires us to sacrifice in order to step fully into it. So I think there's something of that tied up in it, which I think is quite exciting, actually, to know that this isn't a flippant thing that God's called us to. It's the work of redemption. It's the work of restoring everything. It's exciting.
That so neatly leads on to my next verse that I almost want to jump straight into that. But just as you're talking about solemnness, I guess there is such a serious moment there where Moses is being sent back, has tried to run away, and God's calling him back into the story. But that story also ends on the other side of the river after his whole tribe, his whole people have been set free, and they're singing and being joyful. That there's a seriousness about our faith, but it's tied up in joy as well. So it's not dry, but that doesn't mean it's flippant and meaningless.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's both deeply serious and joy, kind of mind-blowing joy.
Yeah, totally.
I can't remember what you said. God restoring everything. That's how I was going to segue. So my verse for just now is one almost at the very end of the Bible, so the book of Revelation. And we are seeing everything being put back to how it should be, and we're seeing images of Eden at the very beginning of the Bible coming back, and the story of God winning in the end. And I'm going to, Revelation 21 verse 5 finishes with John being told to write all this stuff down, but this vision is told to write it down, but it starts, "He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new." I'm making all things new. Everything is being put back to how it should be, being renewed. What's your verse? And then we'll talk about it.
My verse is one that, if anyone was paying attention last week or whenever you
are probably going to be week 4, so 3 weeks ago.
Was paying attention 3 weeks ago, they would have heard you share this one. And if anyone was paying attention about 6 months ago when we did Desert Island Verses, was that a year ago?
Very good.
Wow. Then I would have shared this, and it's not because I don't know any other verses in the Bible, but it's because this one continually comes back to me time and time again. It's Jeremiah 29, verses 4 to 7. Again, not a single verse, Ollie. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have called you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper.
It's an excellent choice. Not just because I chose it a few weeks ago, but let me talk about mine first, and then we can get into yours. I think the world feels like a very shaky place at the moment. I think politics seem all over the place. Everything seems really unstable. My dad, when he's talking about business stuff, talks about we live in a VUCA world that is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. VUCA, VUCA. That in the past there was a normal for the world and everyone kind of understood what normal was, and I think we live in a world where nothing's normal anymore. Everything's in a state of flux and change, and decisions being made politically seem wild. They're just, there seems no stability, and I think it's really easy to lose heart in all that and just give up and go, this just all seems unbelievable. I don't know how to make any sense of the world. And I think this is what Revelation exists to do. I think it's a call to faithfulness for the church to say keep going, because in the end God wins. And Eleanor and I sat down to watch a movie a while back, and she was like, oh, we've watched this before, blah 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 and blah 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 happens. And I'm like, I'm glad you've seen it before. I haven't seen this movie before. And a movie with a big twist, and she told me the twist right from the off. But we know how the story finishes. We know that God wins in the end. That Revelation talks so much about empires rising and empires falling, and the next empire rises and the next one falls. And there's kingdom after kingdom stake a claim to this world, and in the end God wins. And everything is made how it should be. So I think in the midst of all the chaos, I cling on to stuff like this, where I'm just like, I will remain faithful, because God wins in the end, and when it doesn't make sense to me, God wins in the end, and when it seems overwhelming, God wins in the end. It gives me hope, it gives me assurance, it gives me motivation just to keep going, even when I can't see through the fog of what's happening next. You keep going, because in the end, it all works itself out.
I think that's good. I certainly have been feeling something very similar. I am an avid follower of some of the more fringe political commentators, and I'm not sure that I fully buy the narrative that the world is entirely more volatile now than it ever was. There's an argument for that, and I think there will be those who would say, yeah, but think about the World War period, think about, the Vietnam period, think about the Cold War, when people weren't sure if they were going to get up in the morning, or if there was going to be a nuclear apocalypse. But there is certainly, in this time, something as odd, if not more odd, than there was then. Certainly some of those commentators, and even some of our more well-known historians will talk about this period almost feeling and reading a bit like the fall of some of the great empires, the fall of Rome, for example, where things like introspection and navel gazing and kind of self-indulgence and a whole load of stuff just became almost the foundations of the society and all of the other things that it was founded on, and some of our real values that I think our civilization have been founded on are being stripped away, and I think when you think that through too much, it could probably spiral you into a bit of nihilism and a bit of a bit of hopelessness, except that this is a story in which God wins. This is a story in which Jesus has already overcome the enemy. It's a story in which the restoration of all things has already begun. And he calls us into partnership to see that come about, and that's so exciting. And so, if we're looking for some sort of meaning or some sort of purpose in life today, then what better meaning, what higher purpose than to partner with our Creator in the job of restoring everything? I think that's so exciting, and I think that's a great thing to be part of. I think that's so cool. Yeah, that's excellent.
So, I said this before, I think Revelation, I think we often think of it as a book about what the end of the world's going to be like. I don't really think that's what its purpose is. I think its purpose is to say to the church in the midst of what looks like Rome being more powerful than it, to say actually understand, see the bigger picture. So apocalypse doesn't mean the end of the world. Apocalypse means the pulling back of the curtain. So I think John is pulling back, or God's pulling back the curtain so John can see it, and saying two things. He's saying, see this story in its full spiritual thing. So understand that what you're seeing in the physical isn't just this tiny bit of Rome's persecution that you can see. There's a whole spiritual battle going on. But he's also saying from the very beginning of time to the end of time, where you find yourself now as part of this much bigger story as well. So it's a vertical drawing back curtain and a horizontal drawing back. So see the spiritual world, but see the big story going on. In your verse, we find the Jewish people in one of those moments where they could easily just have gone, well, it's all over, isn't it? We used to be powerful. Babylon's taken us over. We're now in exile. We don't have our own place anymore. We're under someone else's control. Let's give up. Game's a bogey. Not sure that's a Jewish phrase, game's a bogey. But yeah, and then God speaks through his prophets, and I guess even that prophetic edge of, so often we think about prophecy is here's what's coming in the future. But I think so often the prophets are saying, no, remain faithful.
Yeah.
Understand what God's called you to in the here and now. And so often the prophets are just calling them people back to faithfulness and saying, don't lose heart. This is what God's up to. But why these verses in the middle of all of Jeremiah? Why this?
I think a lot of what you've said and what we've been talking about summarises why. That it's an encouragement in the midst of a time where people are looking for a way out. They're not sure how things are going to pan out for them. They're not where they want to be. They're not doing the stuff that they want to be doing, and there are people even promising all sorts of things and tickling their ears with fanciful ideas of what's going to happen. And the true word of God comes, and it's really simple. It's be patient. It's find the beauty in the mundane, everyday parts of life. Invest your time in your children. Invest your time in your gardens. Plant things and watch them grow. Pray for the people around about you. Pray for the city. And even though you don't want to be here, even though these people are your enemies, engage with them. Begin to love them. Begin to build relationships with them. Enjoy being here. You better, because you're going to be here for a while. So you might as well be patient. You might as well pause. You might as well enjoy this moment that you're in. And actually, that's not a call to run away. It's not a call to ignore what's happening. It's not just pretend all this. Just pretend where you are is nice. It's none of that. It's an acknowledgement of, I know what this is like. The best thing that you can do now is to invest in what's round about you. Is to remain patient. Is to enjoy the simple stuff of life that I've given you, the ability to fall in love and to have children and to enjoy nature and to build relationships with people. think that's just so important. Again, just I don't want to sound like a broken record, but in a world that seems to inspire us to stand up for the next cause or whatever, and I think these things are often important, but there's also something really important about recognising that living normal everyday life is godly and is good and is often, or at least sometimes, the right thing to do.
I think I haven't really thought about this till I'm listening to you, and I don't know what it was you said that made this thought come into my head, but it's really easy to seek the good of other people. Like it's not easy, it costs us something, but we can do it. And to seek the good of the place you find yourself in. And to do a bit of good and then move on, and do a bit of good somewhere else and move on.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to build a garden.
Yeah.
Because that says I'm staying, and that says I'm going to be here a while, and that says I'm not just going to tell you about Jesus and then leave you. It's let's do life together. It's literally you go put down some roots and plant some things that maybe aren't going to bear fruit for a few seasons, but I'm here and this is where I'm at, and until God calls us out of this, I'm going to be here. It's not a overly coherent thought, but
No, it's good.
I understood what I was saying.
I did too.
Good.
Rob Bell talks about this idea that the Bible starts with a garden and ends with a city, and that God is somehow taking us on this journey from beautiful planned place to beautiful planned place, but both kind of organic. Just this idea that he's bringing us on this journey, and at points in the middle there are references to gardens and cities. Almost to remind us that he's taken us on this journey. And I think that this is one of those moments, and I think one of the reasons why, certainly for me, you obviously mentioned it recently in a work meeting, someone brought this exact passage up. Maybe one of the reasons why it resonates is because there's something eternal about this idea of gardens and cities, that God started everything here, is ending everything there, and in the middle he calls us to recall some of those notions. I don't know what there is in that. Like the idea of it.
Yeah. So sometimes we've spoken about this, sometimes a sermon, not that this is a sermon, but sometimes when we delve into what God's got to say, it's not about giving all the answers, but sometimes it's just about letting an idea hang there in the air, and yeah, cities and gardens, and putting down roots and letting things grow into what God's got them to be. I like that.
Nice.
The next generation then. So we've both got kids, both got a son and a daughter. Yeah, yours both welcome me in their onesies when we arrived. Yeah. It's about bedtime. They haven't been in their pyjamas all day. Maybe they have. It's lockdown. They could well have been. But a leopard and a bear welcome me at the door. But thinking about the next generation, what would you pass on to them?
So I've just opened my Bible at the page where I'm going to read this. And there is, I forgot I put this here, is one of Anna's hairs, and it's in the page. When Anna was a baby, Fiona laminated this whole psalm and printed it out in the New Living Translation. I'm going to read it from the NIV, but it's the same principle. And it was sort of hung on the side of Anna's cot, and every night I would go in and I would pray it and read it over her. And that's why one of Anna's hairs is in here, just to remind me of that every time I fall on this page. It's just the first verse of Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty.
So I am in Psalm 139, verse 14. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. I didn't, when I was picking my verses today, I didn't necessarily see a link between them at the time, but I guess as we're talking, I think the world for young people has changed since you and I were at school. I think the world of social media, I think the pressures put on kids, it just feels like a different world. I spent a bit of time in schools doing chaplaincy work. And there's so much that feels overwhelming as a parent. And there's so many pressures put on identity and who we need to be to fit in. So I guess if I could tell my kids anything, it's that you've been fearfully and wonderfully made. That you are who you are made to be. That who God has made you to be, at the times you feel you don't fit in, that's okay. That you don't need to play up to an archetype of who you think you should be, but rather be yourself and be who God made you to be, and celebrate that. And the weird things about you, let them be weird. The beautiful things about you, let them be beautiful. The bits that will make sense as you get older, let them make sense when it's the right time for them to make sense. That God has made them to be who they're going to be, and they have a story that is going to look different than the story I expect it to be for them, I'm sure. And they will make choices that I go, don't get that, but that's their story, and I want them to step into the story God has for them, not try and mold themselves into something else.
It's one of the amazing things about being a parent, is watching these little people grow up and develop personalities of their own. And there's a little bit of me and a little bit of Fiona and a whole load of themselves, and just seeing, bits that are rightly shaped by their friends and by their circumstances, being able to engage them in conversation about questions to do with relationships or the world, and just seeing their relationships with one another, relationships with us and with God develop as they get older is really it's humbling just to be part of that, and really awe-inspiring as well. And I think it's just so vital, that message that God has made you the way that He's made you. It's not by any coincidence, and it's not by mistake, but it's by divine design that you've come about. I think that's just a really important thing to grasp hold of. It's cool.
So your Psalm, what was it, 91?
Psalm 91, verse 1. Those who dwell in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I think that as we get older, certainly something that I've realised is that it becomes more important almost on a daily basis to learn to pause and to stop and to take stock, and to assess where you are. Sometimes just to pause and to be with yourself, sometimes just to stop and spend time with God, sometimes just to take time out from everything, to be with people that you love, sometimes just to do nothing. I think it's so important, and as we get older, the pressures of life and of running houses and cars and jobs and all of the other stuff that comes along can quite easily encroach on those opportunities to pause. And so I think what I would really want to make clear, certainly to my children, is that those opportunities, I think, come much more easily when we choose to dwell in the shelter of the Most High, when we choose to be people who live our lives under God's shadow, who live our lives under the direction of God, who are led by His voice. And I think those moments for pause and for rest are found much easier. And I think that the chance of burning out, the likelihood of being overwhelmed, all these things are, although there's no guarantees, I think all these things are reduced if we are, aware of where God is calling us to be, and that we know that we are sheltered by Him. So yeah, that would be my reason for passing that on, that the importance of living your life under the shelter of the Most High.
Either last week or the week before, I've chosen 3 verses for each person I've interviewed, so I can't remember who I shared which verses with, but one of mine was in Psalm 23, where it says, "You set a table before me in the presence of my enemies," and just this image of pausing in the midst of chaos, that it doesn't mean our walk's going to be nice and easy. And I think it's something our kids need to know, is your life's going to be difficult at times, but in the midst of that, taking moments to pause and sit down with God, and as that battle rages around you, as your enemies try and attack you, as darkness feels like it's overtaking you, God sets a table to sit down with me. I guess the importance of pausing and not go, which, as much as our world's individualistic, it's also go, do, achieve, get. And maybe we need to pause. Just rest, and He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge.
Yeah, I've written down here, I don't even remember writing it, but just as I was writing some notes on this verse, the last sentence I've written is, "The world won't produce this." And I think that's exactly what you're saying, that actually it's a world that doesn't really promote those times. It's a world that demands achievement, that, status is the thing that people judge you on, and actually that's not what God judges you on. And ultimately it's not normally what your loved ones judge you on, it's not what your kids judge you on. And the world will produce those moments of pause and those moments of taking stock and those moments of observing what's around you. It's only under the shelter of God. It's only being covered by His feathers, being surrounded by His protection.
So this is the 4th interview I filmed, probably the 4th one that will go out. I don't know, I might change the order, I might not. But I've just thoroughly enjoyed sitting down with people and just pausing and just talking about scripture, and not really having an agenda or a plan or knowing where the conversation's going to go, and not trying to read the Bible so I can write a sermon on the end of it. But yeah, just sharing scripture and sharing the story of God with people. And just being reminded of God's goodness, and literally dwelling in the shelter of the Most High, resting in the shadow of the Almighty. I've got loads out of all of these interviews. So thank you for sharing with me. Thank you for sharing with these guys as well. Thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
No,
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening. But most of all, thank you.
And thank you, Willie.
No, thank you. And thank you for being quiet. Thank you.